We have a special guest to talk about a new MLB proposal. The NBA NHL seasons are getting pushed back, and we look back on episodes 3 and 4 of The Last Dance. But first, the Little League World Series is canceled.
This is Beyond the Stats with Zack and Tanner.
So, Zack, the Little League World Series has been canceled, and this is the first time since this has started that it has been canceled due to the coronavirus. I don't know about you, but I'm a huge fan of the Little League World Series and the style of it. But I'm curious as to what your initial thoughts are.
Yeah, so like you said, Little League World Series canceled for the first time, and also it's the first time there hasn't been any sort of Little League World Series since 1947. Which is pretty insane. So this year would have been the 74th straight year of the Little League World Series. So that means the 2022 season will now be the 75th year of Little League World Series baseball. Unfortunately, it won't be 75 in a row like it would have been, but I mean that it's an institution at this point, and I think a couple of things, they're making the right decision. I also want to acknowledge they're canceling all other tournaments. So they have other tournaments out of the Little League World Series. They have a softball Little League World Series as well. And then they have some tournaments for older people who aren't quite in high school yet that are getting canceled as well, which is unfortunate for that. But yeah, I mean, they're making the right decision. One other event that got canceled, I should mention this, is the 2020 MLB Little League Classic, which is played every year in Williamsport. Two major league teams. It was supposed to be the Red Sox and Orioles this year, but unfortunately, they're not going to get to play that. That's always a fun game as well, on top of, obviously, the entire Little League World Series tournament. And, yeah, it's unfortunate, really. Understandable call. I mean, teams, it's the way it is. These are always the right calls, but it's still so unfortunate to miss out on baseball, especially the Little League World Series. It's just a joy. I mean, you have some of the best things from the Little League World Series, like Big Al. Like, he's like, my name is Big Al and I hit dingers. I mean, like stuff like that. Like, man, we're going to miss out on these kids having the best like introductions, and I don't know. We'll have a star. Like, we're gonna miss out on the next, I don't know, Monet Davis or something. Like just there's just so like the League World Series is sports in its purest form, and I'm bummed to miss out on it for 2020.
And I think another big aspect to it is that it just feels so much more relaxed. I mean, obviously, all the teams have one goal, and that's to win. Both sides, for the United States side and the international side, but then the Little League World Series. But by the end of the day, I will say this, the Little League World Series really promotes sportsmanship and just having fun. By the end of the day, I mean, one of the other iconic parts of Williamsport is the mudslides. When Anthony Rizzo, when the Cubs played, he went down on a piece of cardboard and went down and slid. There are just so many more aspects besides the actual game itself. And you touched on that really well. The other events, there's softball, the MLB, a Little League like All-Star Classic. There's just so much to it that makes it just so great. And it is really unfortunate. And then there's a quote that I actually have from Stephen Kenner, who's in charge of the Little League, and it's that it would be irresponsible and impossible to bring teams and thousands of people from all over the world into the community of Williamsport, as well as those 6 other communities that have been such great friends and supporters of ours over the years. So obviously this is not ideal. This was not what we wanted, but they're just looking in the best interest of safety, because you will have people from all over the world coming into one location. So again, absolutely bummed that this is happening, but I think it's the right move. But again, it's just so upsetting. I always am ready kind of close to back to school time, or even a little later July with like the regional tournaments. But again, I'm like you, I'm super bummed, and hopefully they can find, I can't wait for when this happens. And 75 in a row would have been great to see, but nothing that we could have done.
Yeah. I do have 2 questions that that really first come to mind because so the Little League World Series, the age is between 10 and 12. So no one younger than 10 and no one older than 12 can play. I mean, I'm sure it's like happened, but I mean, legally, no one between the ages of 10 and 12 can play in the Little League World Series. But yeah, do they allow these 12-year-olds who are going to miss out and turn 13? Are they going to let them to play? And then the next question I have is if they do, which I don't think they will, but if they do that, will it affect play? But at the same, so I say that because thinking, well, now there's 13-year-olds and these 13-year-olds, I mean, that's another year of growth. And especially at that age, that can really add a lot of skill and strength and muscle and things like that. But on top of that, that adds a chance for these people to dominate. But then every team would have 13-year-olds. So who knows?
And obviously a lot of questions with this, and we're not really sure. But the only thing we can confirm, again, Little League World Series will not happen. So hopefully when the kids get that chance next year or throughout their actual seasons, best of luck to them in their development. We're going to talk about some MLB with a very special guest. Again, I'm Tanner Camp with Zachariah Begley, and this is Beyond the Stats.
Back here on Beyond the Stats, I'm Zachariah Begley. Joined to me is Tanner Camp, of course, and special guest, broadcast, and media coordinator for the Gary Railcats, Laura Hoover. Laura, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Zach, for having me on.
Yeah, so obviously this segment is about the MLB season and kind of what's going on there. They've talked about some realignment proposals. We've talked about some of those. We talked about one of those in a past show. We're going to touch on this one a little bit, which is different. So I'm going to break down a little bit what the difference is between the two. So that one is proposing every team stay in Arizona and Florida, and then they're going to have two divisions based on where you play your spring training, and you stay at your spring training facility for the entire season. Whereas this new proposal is going to be you start in either Arizona, Florida, or Texas, and then after a couple of weeks or a month, then you're going to go and you're going to play in your home park, but they're still adjusting the division. So there's an East, Central, and West division. The East, it would be the Yankees, Mets, Red Sox, Nationals, Orioles, Phillies, Pirates, Blue Jays, Rays, and Marlins. In the Central, it's the Cubs, White Sox, Brewers, Cardinals, Royals, Reds, Indians, Twins, Braves, and Tigers. And then in the out West, it's the Dodgers, Angels, Giants, the Oakland A's, the Padres, the Diamondbacks, the Rockies, the Rangers, the Astros, and the Mariners. So, yeah, that's kind of what they're looking at. What are your initial thoughts? We'll start with you, Tanner.
So when I look through this, I think the first thing that jumps out is where the actual teams are. I mean, out West, you've got your Los Angeles teams, obviously anywhere in California. You've got all the teams where they would be at, which makes sense, might I add, because then travel wouldn't be as far, like if you had a New York team going all the way out to Los Angeles, pretty much going across the country because we're still kind of unsure with this COVID-19 stuff. So I like the split with it. I think it's good competition as well. Kind of like with what we said with the almost spring training format before, it would give a good variety of teams. Like it's not just the West is completely dominated or one is going to be super weak. I like that format. And I also really like the idea of being able to play in your own ballparks. Obviously, I think at this point they would say would be without fans. But at this point for baseball players, I think they're just itching to get back onto the field. But I like this format. I think this could work as well. It seems, though, the biggest thing is that the MLB is doing everything they can to get the season back.
Yeah, Laura, what are some of your thoughts?
Honestly, I like both plans a lot. And as I'm pretty new into, learning a little bit more about the business aspect of how some teams operate, I am kind of thinking that the original, like the spring training plan, might be a little bit more cost effective, especially if you keep it within states. And that might be a better way to do playoff scenarios rather than the 3 leagues or 3 divisions in this format. Whereas you're both mitigating costs for travel on both proposals, I'm tending to more like the spring training, especially because everything's so uncertain. Like, if we can get back into big cities, that would be great, but big cities are a huge risk right now. And that's just such an uncertain thing that nobody knows what's going on. So keeping it, in the warmer weather, keeping it in places where you can play in more condensed areas, I think is a better, at least, strategy for right now until you get a handle about what's going on. And then maybe you can incorporate something similar to what they're talking about this new proposal about later on in the season if you are allowed to go back to the big cities. So maybe extending that spring training feel for most of the season and only push this back until maybe like a September, October deal. Last few games, home games or whatever. But again, that's operational costs we're talking about, especially in the big cities. You need to make a decision about if you're going to sell tickets or not tickets. And then are we going to have staff for the ball players at the big stadiums? Are you going to clean the stadiums? There's a lot of unknown and a lot of costs to going back to your cities initially. And with all the unknowns, I tend to kind of like the spring training idea. Maybe a little bit more lax on the quarantine aspect as we start to learn more and states starting to open up. But I'm kind of liking it just stay in spring training grounds.
Yeah, so I think the spring training grounds only has been a little bit more of a thought out plan, because some of the questions that I have for this proposed plan are answered in the spring training, in the everyone stay and play at your spring training facility for the entire season. Like, the answer is, how are we going to do playoffs? Well, there's only 2 divisions. You play in the top 2 divisions, play in the playoffs, and then for rule changes, it's full DH. And they're just going to make everything typical American League rules to make it simple. But what I wonder is, they don't, and everything that I've seen, I haven't seen anything about whether they're going to use a universal DH or not. And that's going to matter because this proposal has teams from both the NL and AL in the same division. And I think my guess is that they're going to do universal DH to make it simple. But that's a question that I have. The other thing is, how will this affect the postseason? So are they going to do the same thing, but it'll be 3 teams? And then there's 3 divisions instead of 2. So it's not a clean, oh, you played this many games and then there's 2 teams that play each other at the end for the World Series, because with 3, there's like 3 teams, and then where does it go from there? Are they planning on these teams play and then they split it up for the AL and NL in the playoffs? Like, I don't know. That's my question.
I would assume some sort of wild card based off of rankings by the end of the season. That would be my assumption about how they would do that, and the wild card then plays in obviously with everybody else. But if you're looking for a balance, the spring training is the way.
And Zach, I think as I kind of look back on this with the 2 different proposals, both are good, and I think they both have a equal opportunity to be put into place. But as you said, I think the statement I agree with most is that any questions that are brought up with the first proposal give a lot of good answers to it. And I kind of like the idea of splitting it up and then just best teams with that go against each other. So I agree with you. I think that the first format would probably be the most organized, but also because that one has been kind of in the works, they've been able to answer questions. Maybe we'll get more answers as this new proposal develops. But again, I think the point that's being made is that by the end of the day, and when it comes to fans, because trust me, I believe lots of fans all over the country and even all over the world would watch baseball, even if they know there aren't any fans, because for the baseball players especially, it's just about they want to get back out on the field and they want to get back to their teams and get back to that real feel to it. As a former athlete, I think what's important is, get with the fans. It is important. Sometimes a lot of players feed off of that, but for baseball players and honestly for all of the sports world right now, I think what's important is that we slowly start getting the sports world back into place.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. I think there are pros and cons to both plans. I think this plan just seems like it's a little bit earlier in its planning stage than the last one they proposed. I mean, commend USA Today for their reporting. They got a good story, and I mean, I think this plan would work. Like like Laura said, maybe do a combination of the two plans, because I know the big problem with the other plan is players are complaining about being away from their families for an entire season. I mean, they're talking about 100, 110 games. And you're not playing 110 games in 110 days. That's just not possible. There's going to be day breaks. So that's totally fair that players don't want to spend their entire season in Arizona or Florida without their families, because to really get this happening, you'd have to quarantine, and you can't let families in, because I mean that would start to kind of defeat the purpose of the quarantine. So we'll see what happens moving forward. We'd like to thank Laura for joining us today. We're going to be back, and we're going to be talking about the NBA and NHL pushing back their 2020-2021 seasons when we return right here on Beyond the Stats.
Back to Beyond the Stats. I'm Tanner Camp alongside my amazing partner, Zachariah Begley. Zach, the NBA and NHL are getting pushed back from what we've looked at. NHL is potentially late November, but for the most part, both are looking around December. And this is for the 2020 and 2021 seasons. That's important to note. But
correct.
You and me talked a little bit, and you've got a few more details. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about both the NBA and the NHL?
Yeah, so both seasons suspended about the same time, mid-March. So at the time of suspension, the NHL had played 68 total games. The NBA had played 80% of their season. And so I think, so then they're suspended, and now they're thinking about reopening facilities in the next week or two here in May, as we've just reached into May. It's May 2nd today at the time of this recording. I don't know when you're watching, but looking to turn it in about mid-May, early to mid-May. Both are looking to open facilities as it's deemed appropriate. I mean, they're both telling their teams to open with caution and follow local laws and things like that. But they're also talking about pushing the next season back to December or late November for the NHL for the 2020-21 season. And I think, and it's interesting that they always run on similar timelines. They start about a week or two apart from each other normally. So it makes sense that they're stopped about the same time. They played a similar number of games, and they are thinking about starting next season about the same time as well. I think that's big for what's going on. I think that's big for I think that will keep things on track, is what I should say, and kind of keep the season rolling, and also allow both leagues to kind of get back on track for the 2021-2022 season. If they start a bit later, and I'm guessing they'll shorten some games, things like that.
And I think for both players, for fans, officials, everything like that, I think it also just gives hope in the sense of, this is just such an interesting time. And just as myself, you and everyone around, I think we're itching for both basketball and hockey, your favorite teams, giving them support. So I think this gives hope for both those teams that And for players, especially, the fact that, again, as you know, we're in May, and I think it's around mid-May when they're trying to open up facilities again. Just that fact of getting back, on the rink or in the gym, and getting that feel again. Players for both sports have been trying to cooperate with the circumstances. Given we've seen loads of videos all over of players, staying in quarantine, but at the same time staying with their sport. So I think this is, again, the key thing with this is it's a sign of hope. We've already seen a couple sports that are going to come back. We know that NASCAR is going to be back around mid-May. Golf, professional golf, looks like that's going to come back around early to mid-June. So getting those sports back in place is huge. But I think especially for the big sports like basketball and hockey, I think that's really important for the sports world and fans all over the world.
Yeah, I'm expecting I'm guessing is what I should say. Seasons to start maybe late June, early July, and then and I'm guessing they'll just go right to the playoffs, and then they'll wrap it up. They'll wrap up the playoffs in either late July, early August, and then they won't play, and then they'll have off season until December, and then they'll come back, and then both leagues, the NHL and the NBA, will play a shortened season. And then they'll end about the normal time, late June, early July, or late April, early June, late May, things like that. And then they'll wrap up the seasons, and then they'll be back on track, and they'll start in October.
Yep.
Like they do normally, is my guess of how they're trying to lay it out. And I think that's the right way to lay it out. And then we'll get a pretty good season. The NBA has experimented with shortening their season anyway, so this might give them a chance to kind of test those waters a little bit, do some things, cutting down 3 games in 4 nights, back-to-backs, things like that. Things that they've talked about shortening and cutting out more and more as the league has gone by.
And Zach, I think the other idea is not only do they just want the seasons, to get back into place, but also try to get that same format that they've been following for years and years now, but at the same time trying to get all the players back on the rink and on the court. So hopefully it all works out. That's something I think we're going to definitely keep up to date, but hopefully that they can put this plan, put it permanent. We're going to talk about episodes 3 and 4 of The Last Dance. Again, Zachariah Begley and Tanner Camp here on Beyond the Stats.
Welcome back to Beyond the Stats. Zachariah Begley, joined by Tanner Camp here. We're going to be talking about episodes 3 and 4, looking back on episodes 3 and 4, help you get ready for episodes 5 and 6 that are coming out tomorrow night, depending on when you're watching this. So, Tanner, what are some of your initial thoughts of episodes 3 and 4?
Well, what I really liked about it was that you got a really closer look at Dennis Rodman, who, in my personal opinion, is one of the most important parts of that 97-98 Bulls team. I think it's also important to note that he was also part of the Bad Boys team that won 2 championships and were basically the wall that Michael Jordan could not get past before he really elevated not just his game, but the Chicago Bulls franchise in general. So with Dennis Rodman, it's got a great look to it because episode 3 was focusing more on Dennis Rodman, and then episode 4 was focusing, it felt like, on the Bad Boys in general. And I think it ties in really well because not only was Dennis a big part, in my opinion, one, if not the greatest rebounder to ever play the game, with him being on the Bad Boys, it really co-opt well with each other. So I really liked it because it gives you a look on how challenging it was for Dennis, or his real personality off the court. And I think that's something that's really great. The connection that him and Phil Jackson made, which I didn't know how close they actually had gotten. And that was great to see. And then episode 4, just again, showing how tough the Bad Boys really were, and how both good and bad an impact it made on Michael Jordan and his development. But I really liked it. And I think, like lots of other people, I'm excited for episodes 5 and 6.
Yeah, I mean, episode 3 it was about as crazy as I thought it was, but it was also arguably the most sane one at the same time. Like you know what I mean? It was
I
like
think
the
so,
craziest and the least crazy at the exact same time. I mean, Dennis Rodman, he's such a character. Like honestly, if they made a movie about Dennis Rodman, like a biopic, you could and someone just made that movie, you could almost argue and someone told you it was fictional, you would have believed it. Like some of the things he did, like just go, I'll just take 48 hours off in Vegas in the middle of the season. Like they were in a championship run in 96 and he's like, I need 48 hours off. But then he comes back and he's in better shape than everyone else. And he just been basically drinking for 48 hours straight. Because then they talked about the drill and they said it took 4 laps for them to catch up to Dennis Rodman. And he hadn't been doing anything in 2 days. Like that's insane to me.
And that just helps that showcases who he really is. And I like how all the players really talked about. I know Steve Kerr mentioned that he thinks Dennis might have actually been the most important part of that. And he was also important for that Bulls team when Pippen was down with his injury. But then when Pippen came back, and at first Rodman kind of felt like he was, a third wheel then because, Pippen was a huge part of that team. But then once they figured it out, the part that I like, because I know, just that team during the 90s, is that once Rodman, Pippen, and Jordan figured out each other, that whole team just elevated so much. And of course, Phil Jackson introducing the triangle offense, so well known today, and just his philosophy. I think we got a little bit of insight on Phil Jackson as well, like how he came to the team. And I think that's really important because back in episode 1, part of the idea is that it was known after that 97-98 season, he was gone. No matter whether they won a championship, no matter whether they went 82-0, he was gone. So I think that was important to get a little bit of insight on Phil Jackson. And just 3 and 4, again, just so perfectly put together. And then for 5 and 6, I'll be interested to see what is talked about or what the subjects of matter are. But I'm so excited for it, and I assume you are as well.
Yeah, episode 4 is great. Isaiah, I like how they had Isaiah Thomas in the doc. I liked how they let Michael Jordan get a reaction to Isaiah Thomas's comments about the handshake. I mean, probably the most controversial part of the documentary so far is that handshake. And Isaiah Thomas being like, the Celtics did to us, so we did to the Bulls, and the Bulls are like, but you beat us 2 years in a row. And Michael's like, I even went and did an interview on the court as a sign of respect. You could have shown some respect back. Like, I get that you lost and it was the passing of the torch, but we showed you respect for 2 years. You could have shown us respect for 1 year. And I think that's interesting, like how that kind of how things change, like how the adjustment was, like you could have, and it kind of how they got to that point, like beyond the Bulls just getting better at basketball, they just almost transformed their entire way they approached life to beat the Pistons. And I thought that was, the transformation it took to beat the Pistons by the Bulls was pretty extensive. But like you said, 5 and 6, I'm not sure. Like they could go any number of ways. Maybe they talk about Jordan playing baseball. Like I don't know where it goes from here for The Last Dance. But I'm excited like you. 9 p.m. Eastern for episode 5, 10 p.m. Eastern for episode 6. Of course on ESPN. We'll have to check that out just like you did, or you will. That's really all we have for today. We're on where you listen to podcasts at Beyond the Stats. Comment, rate the podcast, give us some feedback. We enjoy it. We're of course on YouTube at Beyond the Stats. Like, comment, subscribe there. You can find us on social media as well, Beyond the Stats.
That's all we've got for you today. We always appreciate the support. I'm Tanner Camp with Zachariah Begley, and this has been Beyond the Stats.